year is 1830, and in Tasmania, 1 million acres of land has been granted to European settlers. The takeover fuels what becomes known as the Black War, which rages between the Europeans and the first Australians. Truganini is born in the midst of the Black War, and violence is her constant companion. With the destruction of her people in the balance, she agrees to help a white man who offers a bargain: their survival in return for peace. But at what price?
It was the best thing to do. I hoped we would save all my people that were left. Mr. Robinson was a good man and could speak our language, and I said I would go with him and help him. Truganini.
Tasmania sustained a population of some 6,000 First Australians. By 1828, martial law has been declared against the 1,000 that survive. It legalises the shooting of any First Australians who appear in towns or farms. There is also a bounty on their heads, £5 for adults and £2 for any child captured alive.
It was a very, very brutal world, especially for an Aboriginal woman.
The 8 Tasmanian nations are now outlaws in their own country. Truganini avoids death and capture by living in relative shelter on Bruny Island off the coast of Hobart. This is her people's land, the Nuanine, and it is here that a mission is established to protect the First Australians.
People are incredible, how they will cling to life, and Truganini was no different to that. She wanted to live, and she wanted to live a particular way, but that wasn't always available to her.
I think that she lived a very challenging life. Her heart was torn.
Truganini was a vivacious woman. She was intelligent. She had been brought up to compromise.
By the time she was 18, Truganini had already lost her father, who was murdered. Her sister had been kidnapped. Her husband had been murdered. Well, there was a world of violence.
Truganini is 18 when she meets the new mission manager, George Augustus Robinson. He is a Cockney bricklayer from East London who has emigrated to Australia to seek opportunity in the new world.
The governor decided that he should send a missionary to both protect the Aborigines from the Europeans, but also to try and, to teach them how to be civilised.
Robinson was a man on the make. He was a complicated individual. He was much more interested in his own rise through the ranks than he was in Aboriginal people. I don't think she had great expectations of Robinson. He was just the best available option at that time. He wasn't a violent man. One of the few white people they knew didn't shoot them.
I was anxious to know if they could be instructed in whether anything could be done for their moral, religious and material improvement. George Augustus Robinson.
I'm a great fan of G.A. Robinson. I think he had a great empathy with Aboriginal people. I think he genuinely did want to save them.
At this time, people like George Augustus Robinson, as with most people, believed in the literal truth of the Bible. They believed in heaven and hell, and they believed that only Christians would be saved. They also believed it was their mission to give the message, to save people.
I think he actually genuinely cared about their welfare, but it's obvious that he didn't get it right.
I saw him as a greedy, selfish, self-centred person, and I think he really did exploit my old people.
So that first year he spent at Bruny Island trying to establish a mission, setting out plans, making plans for what it would look like and what would happen there. It was clear it was not going to work.
The mission is a failure as people die from European disease, to which they have no immunity.
They die in confinement. And we see this over and over again in Van Diemen's Land. People die in large numbers in confinement.
Housed together, lethal germs pass with ease between the first Australians. The survivors now avoid the settlement, as it is their tradition to vacate a place in order to avoid the spirits of the dead. On mainland Tasmania, the body count of the Black War is escalating on both sides. Governor Arthur is coming under increasing pressure from wealthy landholders to do something.
They were desperate to get rid of Aboriginal people because the blackfellas were bringing the price of land down, you know. You can't sell a block of land if you're going to get shot at. So they were going to rid the island of this bad mob of people.
The whole of Tasmania had become a war zone, and it was rapidly turning into the killing fields. And Robinson believed that unless he brought them in, not a single Aboriginal would survive.
Robinson and Governor Arthur make a plan to go into the bush beyond the frontier and to make contact with the first Australians to negotiate a deal for peace.
The new role that Robinson actually made for himself revealed him both as a reactionary on the one hand and an opportunist, a political opportunist on the other.
If he could convince the government that he was very good at conciliating with Aborigines, he could make some money out of it. He could make something of himself.
They call it the friendly missions.
Robinson would go out and negotiate with people who were actually the guerrilla fighters.
Truganini took on the role of mediator between Robinson and her own people and other Tasmanian groups. She adapted to her role. It was that or die.
Once the smoke of a group is seen from a distance, Truganini and the women track the first Australians to their camp and translate the deal Robinson is offering on behalf of the government.
The deal, as they understood it, was that they would retreat to the offshore islands. They would be in Robinson's care there, and then they would return to their homeland once they'd struck a deal with the governor. And that was firm in their hearts.
Robinson takes the risk of travelling unarmed to assure those he meets that he is not like the other white men that they fear.
He was totally dependent on the Aboriginal people who were with him to guide him. So in a sense, they read the country for him. And that must have been a most wonderful experience. And he was, I mean, his journals reveal this excitement of being in country that only Aboriginal people knew.
I was aware of the difficulties of the undertaking, especially as I'd been informed that it was impractical and that no person had ever attempted it. By some, the idea had been ridiculed as visionary. George Augustus Robinson.
I think that the term friendly missions doesn't really represent what happened.
Upon the natives seeing our party, they immediately fled to the mountains, setting the plains on fire as they fled, to alarm the rest of their tribe. Sent 4 of my natives after them. They stripped themselves of their European clothing and went in quest of them. Truganini, Pagely and Waradi returned. Stated they'd made the natives understand the nature of my mission to them, and said the natives were anxious I should come to them in the morning. George Augustus Robinson.
Robinson pursues Manalagena, a leader who has become infamous for sustaining the guerrilla war in the north. Manalagena's acceptance will be the key to persuading his people to join Robinson.
I'm sort of 5th generation Manalagena. He took an incredible responsibility on his shoulders to try and save his people. I mean, you've got to go back to those, try and think back to the way you think as an Aboriginal person and the way that great man would have felt at that time.
This morning, I developed my plans to the chief, Manalagena, and explained to him the benevolent views of the government towards him and his people. I informed him I was commissioned by the governor to inform them that if the natives would desist from their wanted outrages upon the whites, they would be allowed to remain in their respective districts and would have flour, tea and sugar, clothes given them. That a good white man would dwell with them, who would take care of them and would not allow any bad white man to shoot them. He was much delighted. George Augustus Robinson.
Manalagena accepts the bargain and becomes one of Robinson's diplomats.
Why were they willing to go with him? Why did they tell him so much about their own culture and society?
Our people were all being killed, and it was no use fighting anymore. And Mr. Robinson was our friend and would take us all to a good place, Truganini.
If she could at least tell her people, if she could get the message across to them, at least they would survive rather than simply come in contact with the British and end up dead.
She perhaps thought that she was offering them the chance of life as well, because perhaps too, if they had stayed where they were, they would have been killed by renegade settlers who were intent on murdering every Aboriginal person that they found. There were, after all, for a period of time, bounties on Aboriginal heads. They might have been murdered by sealers if they were living on the coast.
For years, the sealers have been visiting the Tasmanian coastline, coming from all parts of the world. They hunt prized whale and seal oil, meat and skins. They also seek Tasmanian Aboriginal women.
These men were the crudest examples of humanity that were going around.
Those men, they took our women. They took our women and raped our women. They treated them very, very harshly.
As a young woman, Truganini had borne the full onslaught of these brutal men.
One of the 2 sealers said they would take us in a boat to Bruny Island, which we agreed to. 2 young men from my tribe came for me. One of them was to be my husband.
Truganini's husband-to-be was captured, and the whalers and sealers had promised them some kind of deal.
When they got halfway across the channel, they murdered the 2 natives and threw them overboard. But one of them held me, Truganini.
Halfway there, they tipped all the men out, and just so they could have the women. The men, of course, tried to swim back to the vessel because they were well out at sea, and sailors cut their hands off. And then they took those women, knowing that their blokes are drowning in the sea. People wonder about Truganini's motivation for the things she did. She saw that.
Whilst on the friendly mission in 1832, Truganini risks her own life to save Robinson's.
Robinson's party were in serious danger of being attacked, and they managed to escape and came to the river, the flooded river. And of course Robinson couldn't swim, and he was saved by Truganini, who got together logs, and Robinson clung onto them, and she swam across. So both she got him away from people who probably would have killed him, but two, she saved him from a watery grave as well. So there was a close bond between them, but whether it was, whether it was sexual, whether it was just a kinship bond is hard to know.
Whether or not Robinson and Truganini were lovers, that's their business, and you know, good luck to them. They were pretty nasty days. If that was a joy, good luck to them.
Tasmanian woman was able to wield political power. They could move easily between their own society and settler society because white settlers did not see them as a threat. Sexual favours were offered as diplomatic tributes to other Aboriginal groups and indeed to the settlers. So it was a very different kind of world for women. You can't judge by the standards of 21st century Western standards. And indeed, you know, Aboriginal women were armed and ferocious enemies sometimes.
One such ferocious enemy was the warrior woman, Wallia. She stalks the friendly missions, intending to kill Robinson.
The sealers told me of the Amazon named Wallia that headed a tribe and would stand on a hill and give orders to the natives when to attack the whites, calling them bad names and telling them to come out, and they would spear them. He said she liked white men as she did a black snake. George Augustus Robinson.
Wallia had experiences from, as a young girl, she was raped by the sealers, and so she learned to distrust them.
That was her answer to it. I'll bloody kill you. And Truganini chose a fractionally different path. But I'm really reluctant to say she was wrong.
For some people, to die honourably is a much better choice, and some people would prefer to go that way. I think other people were simply murdered and had no choice. But Truganini, for most of her life, had some choices. They were limited, but she made the choice to survive.
Whilst on their mission, Robinson hears of another strategy being employed by Governor Arthur. It is called the Black Line. Arthur summons every white man in the colony to create a line stretching across the settled districts to drive the first Australians into a corner.
Cowardly beings. I question the bravery of those persons engaged in the crusade against the natives. What can be more revolting to humanity than to see persons going forth in battle array against that people whose land we have usurped and upon we have heaped every kind of misery? God forgive them, George Augustus Robinson.
The Black Line. You know, they've been fighting a war against the guerrilla army for 30 years. They've failed continuously to quell that uprising of people fighting for their land. So in a last-ditch attempt, he tries to round up all the people. Now, some genius in his department has suggested this to him. A soldier with even an ounce of experience and intelligence would have seen that it was going to fail.
There are 2,200 white men. They have 1,000 stands of arms, 30,000 rounds of ammunition, and 300 sets of handcuffs.
Part of the crudity and barbarity that happened in Tasmania was because they gave weapons to convicts and said, oh, now, we want you to stake out this bit of country here and quell the uprising, which is code for shoot as many Aboriginal people as you can find.
Much of the official government history of Australia purports that Australia was settled peacefully. It purports that the Australian Constitution was the only constitution in the world developed in a time of peace. Australia had no revolutions or wars. Well, the Black Line and the Black War put the lie to this grand national mythology.
I mean, it was the largest military operation domestically in Australia until the 20th century. It cost a great deal of money, millions in modern-day money.
All the boys were so excited. They had their dogs and they were firing weapons day and night. They didn't see any Aboriginal people, but they were firing the weapons, and it was just a cacophony. It was just this barrage of artillery going off, and according to some of those women, it was absolutely terrifying.
The threat of the Black Line is used by Robinson to convince those he meets to join him.
I described to them the formation of the line by tracing it on the ground with a stick, and informed them that the mighty enemy were at that time engaged in capturing their countrymen, and would shortly appear in formidable array in front of their own territory. They complained in bitter terms of the injuries to which they had been exposed through the medium of the whites. I recommended to them to accompany me without delay. George Augustus Robinson.
The Black Line captures just one old man and a young boy. Robinson, however, is much more successful, and his fame is increasing.
All the different plans have been rendered abortive, and I have reason to know that the work in which I am engaged is the work of God. George Augustus Robinson.
He's going to get a massive financial bonus if he gets every one. It's a sort of performance bonus that he's negotiated like modern-day executives.
I did well to engage with the government for the capture of all the natives. For if I had been restricted to their first offer, I should not have seen any natives, and they would have been dissatisfied and would have withheld from me their reward. By taking the whole, I gained not only the reward, but the celebrity. George Augustus Robinson.
Governor Arthur is delighted that Robinson has rounded up some 300 people. He doubles his salary and rewards him with land.
Robinson's bloody massive achievement was only achieved by the desperation of the people and the diplomacy of people like Truganini.
En route to the promised haven at Flinders Island, 2/3 of the 300 people die of European disease by being confined together in jails and transit camps. Robinson celebrates the arrival at Flinders Island with a fireworks display and orders a feast to be held.
They'd been removed on the belief that they would return to country. They were rounded up, really, and set up in a little colonial village. And that's what Waibelina is. And they weren't allowed to speak language. They weren't allowed to do ceremony.
As soon as he got them to Flinders Island, he subjected them to a regime that was basically a crash course in becoming white.
They tried to teach them Christianity, trying to really push them into the white man's way of life, and of course it wasn't going to work. They had their own beliefs, their own cultures, their own heritage, and they wanted to maintain that. It was really traumatic.
In 1 year alone, 29 people die on Flinders Island. There are now only 90 people left.
This is not the glorious mission that he'd imagined of turning these people into an agrarian, civilised, sort of Christian folk. This is just a place of, of death.
And the place was incredibly well equipped. I mean, if you look at Waibelina and compare it with any other mission anywhere in Australia in the 19th and indeed into the 20th century, it was far better equipped, far more expensively set up than any other mission anywhere in Australia. Remember, they made thousands and tens of thousands of bricks for permanent buildings with good fittings and proper doors and door handles.
Truganini is witness to the mounting death toll.
There will be no blackfellas to live in the houses. Truganini.
But of course, once they got the Tasmanians off the mainland of Tasmania onto the Bass Strait Islands, there was no way that the settlers would let them come back.
He actually said, look, it'll just lead to a collapse in property prices and we're not having that hassle. It was all quite convenient for the authorities just to keep them on Flinders.
A lot of those people died facing south, looking to their homeland. Robinson writes about it in his diary. He didn't understand it as completely as he should, but the people sat on the beach looking to their homeland. They lost their spirit, and disease always picks up those who have lost their spirit first.
The sad mortality which has happened among them since their removal is a cause for regret. But after all, it is the will of Providence, and better they die here where they are kindly treated than shot and inhumanly destroyed by the depraved section of the white community. George Augustus Robinson.
And so just at that moment when it was realised that the Aborigines on Flinders Island were, their numbers were declining very rapidly, suddenly it emerges as sort of a view, well, maybe there's a rational reason for this. Or rather than saying it's because the settlers slaughtered them, let's find there must be some scientific reason. That thinking starts to work in with new ideas about evolution.
In 1836, the scientist Charles Darwin stops in Hobart on his epic journey around the world. What he sees informs his theory of evolution, later published in his monumental book, The Origin of Species.
All the Aborigines have been removed to an island in the Straits, so that Van Diemen's Land enjoys the great advantage of being free from a native population. This most cruel step seems to have been quite unavoidable, as the only means of stopping a fearful succession of robberies, burnings and murders committed by the blacks, but which sooner or later must have ended in their utter destruction. I fear there is no doubt that this train of evil and its consequences originated in the infamous conduct of some of our countrymen. 30 years is a short period in which to have banished the last Aboriginal from his native land. Some even think the race will soon become extinct. Charles Darwin.
If society was evolving, then there had to be winners and losers. And the Tasmanians were among the losers. So this was a story that was repeated again and again, the dying race.
And I think this view is a kind of, it's a solace to the colonists who, you know, who've had to bear responsibility for the virtual disappearance of the Aborigines. So this new science somehow or other lets everybody off the hook.
Manalagenna dies without having seen his country again. But Manalagenna's daughters survive. Out of reach of Robinson, his daughters, and other women who have escaped capture live with sealers.
There were many Aboriginal women who had relocated to lots of other smaller islands in the Bass Strait. These women were still having children, still practising culture, which leads us to where we are now in terms of the lineage and the continuation of being Tasmanian Aboriginal people.
So it suited themselves, the way they wanted to get rid of the notion of ridding the Indigenous people of this land, because they wanted the land themselves. You know, history records that. But unbeknown to them, we were on other islands in our own small communities on the Bass Straits of Tasmania, and even till the day carry a very strong Aboriginal continuing living culture. You know, and there's something very intrinsic about the nature of being Indigenous to these lands.
And that's where I come from, in that sense of my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. That was a continuation of who we are.
Robinson, now famous for being the Aboriginal expert, is offered a lucrative job as Chief Protector of Aborigines in the new state of Victoria. But Robinson is torn. He wants to take the 75 remaining residents at Flinders Island with him, but the Victorian government resists, concerned about real estate values.
Should His Majesty's government still object to their removal and continue the settlement where it now is, I have no hesitation in stating that the race in very short period will be extinct. George Augustus Robinson.
Finally, they agree to only a few, and in 1839, Truganini and 14 others depart Flinders Island, leaving 60 behind.
She must have decided that in order to survive, it was best to go along with Robinson's plans, and that in exchange for her cooperation, he would treat her well, he would treat her especially well, and that she would not suffer the fate of other Aboriginal people.
He was using her as a negotiating tool to advance his position, in my opinion.
It might not have been the life they wanted to live, but at least it was a life.
He took those closest to him, and it leads to tragedy.
Once they arrive in Victoria, Robinson realises Truganini and the others are no use to him as diplomats, as they don't know the country or the language. He cuts them loose.
A group of them, including Truganini, leave Robinson and go off through the country, and they kill Europeans.
2 white sealers are brutally murdered by them. Truganini and the men with her are arrested.
I think by that stage, in Truganini's heart, the game is up. She's been betrayed once by Robinson and abandoned for a second time.
Robinson visits Truganini in jail, and he gives evidence at her trial.
She has accompanied me on all my journeys. I am indebted to that woman for the preservation of my life on one occasion at Arthur's River. She swam and took me across. I've never found these persons wanting in humanity. George Augustus Robinson.
Truganini is found not guilty. The men are not so fortunate. It is to be the first hanging in Victoria, and crowds gather for the spectacle. The newspaper reports Pivet's last words. He has acted as a diplomat on behalf of Robinson.
He declared that when he died, he would return to his country to hunt kangaroo, and that he had 3 heads. 1 for the scaffold, 1 for the grave, and 1 for Van Diemen's Land. The Port Phillip Times, 1839.
Robinson returns to London. He has been well paid in land and gold for his work, and he is now a rich gentleman.
I'm sure in Robinson's heart there was a desire to do good. That missionary impulse to bring light into the dark, but I think it was overwhelmed by Robinson's own hubris, his pride, his desire to become a man of importance in this new colony. I think that was far more important in Robinson's history than anything about altruism in his heart.
Truganini is returned back into exile with the 45 other survivors of Flinders Island. They have little contact with the outside world until 1847, when a petition is sent from Flinders Island. They complain about the new manager, who treats them with cruelty, and they remind the government of their promise.
We are your free children. We are not taken prisoners, but freely gave up our country to Governor Arthur after defending ourselves. Mr. Robinson made for us with Colonel Arthur an agreement which we have not lost from our minds since, and we have made our part of it good. Your petitioners humbly tell that when we left our place, we were plenty of people. We are now but a little one.
Those promises were broken, very blatantly broken. My old people trusted that they would be able to continue their culture and live on their homelands. But that didn't happen. And that is one of the biggest lies in the history of Tasmania.
The government responds by returning them back to mainland Tasmania, but not to their homelands. In 1847, they sail to Oyster Cove, south of Hobart, where another reserve is set aside for them. It is a deserted convict station.
I think there was so much sadness at that point of time for my people because of this cycle of relocation. I don't even think they had the strength to be happy returning to their homelands, because they weren't returning to their homelands. They were returning to another dark, cold, damp, colonial jail. I mean, you look at those photos and there's beautiful Aboriginal women who have just experienced so much despair in their life. And they're sitting there in strange clothing, their hearts are broken. And I think the strongest human characteristic they had was that of belonging, knowing that their life would never be the same. And their strength was in their togetherness, despite those horrible, horrible conditions.
"20 years pass. Of the 46 who arrived at Oyster Cove, now only 3 survive. Truganini is one of them. Darwin's theories are widely debated, and some scientists wrongly believe that Tasmanian Aboriginal people are the most primitive people on Earth. It is another insult to Truganini and her people.
There's an enormous trade in Aboriginal human remains that go to museums literally all over Europe, North America, and to own an artefact from the most primitive people on Earth becomes a trophy.
In 1869, William Lanny dies. His skull is stolen in the dead of night.
The fascination of science initiated a process of our old people's bones being dug up for further scientific investigation. And they were sent all around the world to many, many places in Britain and Europe. The bones of my old people.
Strips the Aboriginal people of their humanity. Science is not really interested in human beings, live human beings. It's interested in dead people who are stripped of their skin, of their souls. They are just seen as scientific specimens. And that's a much safer place to view Indigenous peoples, because if you remove them, their humanity, then we don't really have to worry about what we did to them.
Most people want to believe that they have an honourable past and they have honourable ancestors. So the only way that most Australians can pretend that the Australian nation was developed honourably is to lie. And so these terrible histories are often lied about. And this is why the Tasmanian history is the most disputed amongst historians. Because some people say, let's face up to it, and others say, well, actually, I find it more comfortable to lie about it.
Truganini is afraid she may also be dismembered for scientific purposes. On a boating trip with her friend, as they cross the water, she begs him.
Bury me here. It's the deepest place. Promise me. Don't let them cut me, but bury me behind the mountains. Truganini.
Truganini is now wrongly considered to be the last legitimate Tasmanian Aboriginal person alive.
That's the great misunderstanding in my people's history, because that leads us to the global myth that Truganini was the last Tasmanian Aboriginal person.
Colonisers want certainty. They want to be sure that their victims are utterly and finally vanquished. And so they create myths. The last Mohican, the last of the Tasmanians.
The last American Indian. There's always the last Aztec. There's always, the last Eskimo. Because it's like, cheerio, off you go. We didn't want you in the first place, and now we'll put up a memorial to the last one, because it costs us nothing.
There will never, ever be no Tasmanian Aboriginal people. Never, ever.
Truganini dies on the 8th of May, 1876. She had the right to be afraid. Her body is exhumed and her skeleton put on public display in the Tasmanian Museum. 100 years later, her people reclaim her remains. They cremate her and scatter her ashes into the water as she had wished.
If you look at some of Ricky Maynard's photographs, not only are they extraordinary works of art, but they say something that ordinary words can't say about the past that modern-day Tasmanian Aboriginal people have inherited. In the big skies in his photographs, the windswept grass plains, it's as if the past is the heaviest burden for Tasmanian Aboriginal people, and it is as if they were long ago condemned to death and they live in a kind of netherworld because of the racism, the historical racism, and a peculiar, hateful kind of racism that they've suffered. And so I'm struck in those photographs by how resilient Aboriginal people like Ricky Maynard are. And by making these works of art, he's saying, as many Tasmanian Aboriginal people have said, we exist.
So our culture hasn't stopped. It's just that the white man wants to think that suits himself. So he denies his own history. That's why I say Australia simply has to grow up and get over denying their own history so we can all get on with it.
Continuing Sunday, in Victoria, 2 leaders emerge who help prevent the extinction of their people.
On July the 7th, 1875, Barak leads a delegation of Corranderk residents to Melbourne.
He's highly intelligent, in many ways, I think, superior to the white colonials that he was dealing with.
Yes, go and talk to the governor, go and talk to the Queen. But in his mind, as he walked down there, he would have been thinking, no, I'm going there to beg.
Blackfella now throw away old war spears.
Would you allow me to have my 2 daughters with me here?
We don't want any board over us.
And I thought, that's the spirit of Barak.
First Australians continues Sunday 8:30 on SBS.
And it struck against Governor Phillip's collarbone.
They were trying to tell him that they liked him.
If you've missed part of First Australians or you'd like to watch it again, you can view entire episodes online. Go to sbs.com.au/firstaustralians for the untold story of Australia.